Jayden Higgins will miss the entire 2026 season with a torn ACL injury. So, what's next for Houston? In my opinion, it's time to be ballsy and trade for a playmaking receiver.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
From H-Town to your town, today's episode and every episode of the Locked On Texan podcast is for Texan fans all around. A very unfortunate episode. I really don't want to even talk Texans right now, but I have to. As it's been reported, Jayden Higgins will miss the 2026 season with a torn ACL. How does that impact Houston for right now, for tomorrow, and for the season? No preseason starters at all this preseason period. DeMeco Ryans has already announced. So I want to close out today's podcast discussing that. How does Houston rebound? Right? What does rebounding look like for the Texans in this championship window? You can't afford to sit on your hands. For me personally, five receivers I think the Houston Texans should consider trading for. But Jayden Higgins being out for the year, I mean, guys, this is something that sucks. This was a young man who was putting it all together, so we have to talk about the injury in itself and what it means and the impact on the offense and Kaylee, but most importantly, CJ Stroud.
I expect him to, be a dominant force, a guy who can, make plays first, second, and third levels. And I think, he's gotten better. I think he's learning and he's listening more and wanting to, take steps on where he can grow past just, the things that he's already good at.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, and I know the comment section and on social media, you guys are full of comments. So CJ isn't the guy. CJ sucks, and you batter CJ a lot, but you got to feel for CJ Stroud. Obviously, you have to feel for Jayden Higgins, and I'm absolutely going to talk about Higgins. But what you hate for Stroud, for Kelly as well, for the entire offense, they're losing somebody that they trusted to make that year two leap in an offense that can be extremely complex. That's what makes losing Higgins so bad, because now the Texans are forced to go find a body, replace Higgins, but you also got to hope that that receiver can come in and be on the same page as a Nico Collins and all of the other receivers that have been practicing, and that can be caught up to speed and won't be held back by the complexities of the offense. So when you look at Jayden Higgins being out for the year, this is a offensive system that many receivers have not been able to thrive in. Higgins was poised to thrive and boom this year, as we just hear from CJ Stroud, right? And I think in a lot of ways, to end off his rookie campaign, he had some boom moments to be a rookie. So losing Higgins isn't just about, losing a player going into the second year where he was expected to have that leap, that second year leap, which it is, by the way, no doubt about it. But mentally, in the mental reps and the knowledge of the offense and putting it all together isn't just about the physical aspects of the game. It's about the playbook. It's also about understanding what the offense and the scheme itself is asking of receivers, which is an offense that asks them to do a whole lot, just as much as the quarterback. So Higgins being out, as we hear Stroud say, a player who he expected to make plays on all three levels, big playmaking ability, and I think he is the Houston Texans' best red zone threat. I said that as a rookie. That has taken away so much, not only from the receiver room and the potential production, but from your quarterback, who once again, it feels like another hit. How many hits can he survive? But again, Houston is losing a player in Jayden Higgins who, again, best red zone threat, big-bodied receiver, who they felt comfortable based on training camp. They felt comfortable enough with Jayden Higgins and where he was in his own personal progression as a receiver to move him around that formation a lot. I saw a lot of motion with Jayden Higgins, and it felt like while Houston was trying to, in their wide receiver room was nursing itself back to being full and whole and not really having a true slot receiver, it felt like between Hutch and Higgins and Nico, those guys were going to be good enough to kind of supplement not having Tank or not having Jaylin Noel or not having a true slot receiver. And you were expecting, at least I was, expecting Jayden Higgins to have a major role in how Houston goes about deploying whoever is at slot for 2026. And this is also the thing we have to keep in mind. As much as we've talked about the progression from everybody offensively, offensive line, running back group, the tight ends, CJ Stroud in the quarterback spot, progression aside, this is an offense that needs playmakers. This is an offense that no matter how smart or how much they've honed in on their skills going into year two, this is an offense that needs difference makers. Jayden Higgins was a difference maker. The young man was having the camp of his life to the point where we all felt comfortable that his leap was going to be big enough to compensate for the potential of starting the season without Tank Dell and maybe even Jaylin Noel, who's also battling a hamstring injury. He's been out. Now this leaves Houston with a wide receiver room that features Xavier Hutchinson as their wide receiver too. That's not going to cut it. You got a lot of uncertainty about when those two field stretchers and Jaylin Noel and Tank Dell will return back to playing football. And we're 3 weeks away, 3 to 4 weeks away from the first game of the season against Buffalo. You also have a 6th-round pick in Lewis Bond, who's been making his own waves, and Jerry Wayne, but that's not enough. It's not enough. But Jayden Higgins' leap that we all talked about, that we were all excited for, it felt like he was going to be enough to make up for the rest of that room. Now, again, it's like, and for Houston this time it kind of sucks because you end the season typically this way, but now you're opening the season with a wide receiver room that's lacking bodies and it's lacking talent. And everybody that makes it to the NFL is talented. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying on par with the rest of some of the other receiver rooms in the NFL. That's just what it is. And I feel for Higgins because, again, it felt like all of those moments where he was having, some of those close to coming out parties or coming out moments throughout the year last year, even in training camp this year, it felt like this year was going to be the season where he puts everything on full display. And now we have to wait another year. Also, another tidbit, like for Houston, with Higgins going down, is there a hard conversation internally where do they approach Tank or does Tank approach the Texans brass and say, I'm ready to go? If they need him to kind of go through their ramp-up period a lot quicker than expected because there's no more Jayden Higgins. But ultimately, guys, like, you have to feel for C.J. Stroud. You have to. He's down 3 receivers currently, 1 for the year, 2 for how long, who knows for how long. This can greatly impact a quarterback's mental. And this is a quarterback who has lost a significant receiver or offensive weapon every year he's been a Houston Texan. Tank in year 1, Tank and Diggs in year 2, Joe Mixon in year 3 without Tank Dell. This is tough. It's tough on Stroud. It's tough on Kaylee. But more importantly, it's tough on Jayden Higgins. He was poised to have a breakout year. Now, how does Houston rebound? I think that there are 5 options out there that we all should want the Texans to, at the very least, call these teams to see what the asking price for these receivers could be. More Locked On Texans talk on today's pod. Before the season kicks off, everyone is making prediction. Who wins the division? Who makes the playoffs? Who's lifting the trophy at the end of the season? And on Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, you can trade on those predictions in a live market. And here's a fun prediction for you guys out there that's currently available on Kalshi. Defensive Player of the Year winner. Now, for Will Anderson, 13% chance, and it's actually decreasing right now. There's a 13% chance that Will Anderson wins Defensive Player of the Year. Myles Garrett is at 19%. But here's the thing, guys. $100 currently on Kalshi to buy that prediction gets you $706. Again, if you want to buy on that Defensive Player of the Year winner prediction, Will Anderson sitting at 13%, $100 gets you $706.52. I wish it was 51 cents for Will Anderson Jr. But on Kalshi, you're trading against peers in the live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. So you can trade the draft pick, the game, and more on Kalshi. Download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade $10. Kalshi, that is KALSHI. Kalshi, trade on anything. Where does Houston go now to rebound from this unfortunate injury? And I want to say this. I hope this does not come off as insensitive, but I do believe this injury forces Houston to do what they should have done before the injury, and that's go look for additional body that's a true playmaker and talent at the wide receiver spot, right? And so I think because of the injury, if you're Houston, especially operating in this era where you have a real shot to make the Super Bowl, it's not just a Houston media thing. National media talking heads are picking Houston to be the last AFC team standing. So for Houston, and they keep their ears closed to the streets, right? They don't buy into the rat poison, but swing for the fences, right? Why not? What do you have to lose? And again, let me say this. Let me be clear on this. Jared Wayne has had a great camp. Lewis Bond has had a good camp. Xavier Hutchinson has become a player you trust and you like, and he's played good football. And another name that we don't talk about a lot on any platform throughout the city of Houston, if you ask me, is Joshua Kelly. He's played some good football for Houston since arriving this training camp period. That said, it's not enough. And anybody who feels as though this team doesn't need to add a player of significant talent to this wide receiver room is lying to themselves. They're lying to whoever's listening, and they're misguided. That's just what it is. That's just what it is. Now, I do have some receivers that I think would make sense for Houston. I have them broken down in tiers of players who can make the biggest impact for the offense and the quarterback. And starting with tier 3, Kayshon Boutte. Kayshon Boutte is a player with some experience within this offensive system. We all love Lewis Bond, right? Why do we love Lewis Bond? He comes from Boston College. Who was the coach at Boston College? Bill O'Brien. And Bill O'Brien kind of prepared Lewis Bond for this type of offense, this style of offensive, this offensive scheme, excuse me. That's why I think his transition has been so easy because of Bill O'Brien. Well, 2023, Kayshon with Bill O'Brien. 2025, Kayshon with Josh McDaniels. He would be the player, maybe of all of the receivers I'm going to name, who would be able to come in and fit in instantly. And I mean instantly. And this is his 4th year. Late round pick, contract year. Will he get an extension with New England? Who knows? But what we do know is for Boutte, if he does get that extension with any team, the money going to be right. The money will be right. He's not an expensive player. He's not a luxury player. He's one of those guys where you can, essentially you look at the Tua deal. That's something that's kind of similar to what I believe a Kayshon Boutte could get. The next guy you may not like, and I understand it. That's why I have him in tier 3, Jerry Jeudy. Now, it feels like Jeudy is on the outs in Cleveland. It could be a player the Cleveland Browns feel like it's time to move on from. KC Concepcion, Denzel Boston, also Isaiah Bond. If you ask me from a football perspective, Judy should be the odd man out. I don't think he's the vet that you will want to lead those young players. Now, if you're looking at him in Houston, he don't need to be the vet to lead nobody. That's 12, right? And I think a late round pick would get the deal done. The downside to Judy is he has a ton of drops. And I ain't talking about mixtapes, right? 23 combined drops in the last 2 seasons, and he's already under contract for $10 million in 2026 and $13 million in 2027. So of the two in that tier 3, I personally would roll with a Kayshon Boutte. And I also think with Boutte, what he would give any offense, his ability to make plays downfield. I mean, he's a guy that averages 14 and a half, nearly 15 yards per catch. You like that. Tier 2, here's a name that I've talked about, I think, for a year now, and that's Jordan Addison. Y'all know I have been saying for the longest, Houston, call Minnesota about Addison. Go ahead and call him. Now, here's what you like about Addison and the potential of, trading for him and bringing him to Houston. Kevin O'Connell has some experience with Sean McVay. So does Nick Caley. Now, I know it's 2 separate schemes, but for Caley, we can't always, and this is something I need to talk about, we can't always lean on whether he's a scheme fit or not when you need players. Sometimes you got to find a way to get a player the damn ball, right? And I go back to the great Nick Saban. In critical moments, when you need a play, it should never be what my scheme says. It should always be players over plays. Jordan Addison is one of those players who can absolutely fit into this role as a wide receiver too. That's what he's been since entering the league. Played alongside the great Justin Jefferson, who is the best receiver in the league, right? Plays in a very wide receiver-friendly offense, West Coast-derived offensive scheme, takes great advantage of single coverage, and he's also a guy that averaged 14 and a half yards per reception in 2025 with 11 catches of 20 and more yards. He can be that vertical threat, and honestly, I think both sides probably need each other. Bonus, rookie contract. Now, my tier 1 guy. Okay, be prepared because I think this is a win-win situation, and I also think long-term, this is a best-case scenario. And I know those training camp videos are funny and all, but Marvin Harrison Jr. is still a very talented young man who has 2 years left on a rookie deal with the first-round 5th-year option available. Has he lived up to the hype? No. But 2025 wasn't all bad. 5 games of 50 or more yards. And that's with him being, he was dealing with his own things, and the offense kind of geared towards the Trey McBride, and, things kind of changed. But he can still make plays. But more importantly, this is why I think you guys should really think about a Marvin Harrison Jr. Stroud needs someone he can trust. That's the fact of the matter. Because, again, if I were to ask C.J. Stroud a question about this situation, I would ask him about losing Higgins, but my follow-up question is, man, how does it feel to, again, for another year, losing someone that you built a great relationship with on and off the field, but someone that you trust? I could see C.J. Stroud feeling like, man, not again. And so with Harrison, at the very least, we know C.J. Stroud and Marvin Harrison has 77 catches together with almost 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns. And I think that matters. I know it was in college, but I think that matters. And I don't think we've seen the best version of Marvin Harrison Jr. because I don't think he's been in the best situation. Now, could that be Houston in terms of situation-wise? It could be. Maybe not. But what we do need to recognize is, for Houston, there's no way they can sit on their hands and not make a move. That's just not a smart decision. They have this week, They have next week, and then they have the week right before the start of the regular season to figure this thing out. They need to be on the phones calling all other 31 teams. Who do you like over there? Who do you may not like? And for the right price, what Jesus say? For the right price, they got to make something shake. They have to. It would be a disservice to your quarterback, to your offensive coordinator. And you know who else would be a disservice to? Your defense. Because I'm kind of led to believe the outcome will be the same if they do not address his wide receiver spot with the loss of Higgins. No preseason starters. We will not see the starters for preseason. I don't know how you guys feel about that. I understand the decision. I really do. So for the Houston Texans, does that change the outlook? Not defensively, but more so offensively. Does that change the outlook for Houston this preseason period and training camp period? More Texans talk to close out today's pod. There are more live events than ever worth seeing right now. Games, concerts, comedy shows, and festivals. But the hard part usually isn't deciding what you want to attend. It's actually getting the tickets. Between long wait lines, confusing checkout processes, and surprise fees, buying tickets can sometimes feel harder than it should. That's why so many fans are turning to Game Time, where the app is built to make buying tickets simple with upfront pricing, seat views before you buy, and exclusive savings opportunities that help you get to the events you want to without the hassle. My biggest pet peeve is when you think you found a great deal, get all the way to checkout, and suddenly the price looks completely different. I hate it. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And honestly, I don't know about you guys, but I want to know exactly what my view will look like and exactly what I'm paying. Game Time helps me with those two things before I buy tickets ahead of time so I can buy my ticket with a lot more confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to every type of event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Again, download the Game Time app today. Closing out today's podcast, talking Texans and specifically talking about the preseason game. According to Aaron Wilson of KPRC, the Texans are expected to rest several starters versus the Raiders, which is a change in plans from the original idea for Thursday night football, according to league source, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Some offensive starters are still expected to play briefly, potentially CJ Stroud. I love it. I think this is one of those moments where you got to continue to move on, right? We understand this is football. Things happen. But for Houston, they absolutely, they got to figure this thing out, right? And what better time to figure it out? It's right now. This is one of those moments where for your quarterback who has lost playmakers, tight end, receiver, running back, we've talked about it ad nauseum here on the show, like he has to go out there and still be productive with what he has around him. And so I absolutely hope we see CJ Stroud Thursday night. I hope we get him for at least 2 series, especially if that first one's a little bit short, 3 and out. You want to see him come back for maybe another drive or 2. And here's the thing. This is why it's so important. Stroud still needs to play with that offensive line, right? Whether it's Braden Smith or Trent Brown at right tackle, right? I think he still needs live in-game reps with Keelan Rutledge, in my opinion. And also, do we need to see David Montgomery? Probably not. Do we need to see Nico Collins? Probably not. But what we also know is we still want to see Woody Marks in a featured role and more of a diverse feature role. We should see that Thursday, right? We were expecting to see some Jayden Higgins on Thursday. We're not now. So what will we see now with CJ Stroud hopefully out there? How will he play with Jerry Wayne? How will he play with Lewis Bond? And the big part of that conversation is, can we see more of what Bond brings to the table without Davis Mills. I know Davis Mills threw a TD last week, but that drive he was featured on wasn't the greatest. So I think when you get a player like CJ Stroud, who has hit Lewis Bond for a couple of big plays, a few big plays in training camp, the thought is, let's see that in a real game. I hope we get an opportunity to see that Thursday night against the Raiders, because it boils down to this. Like, we know Higgins ain't going to be out there. They're not going to be able to get a new receiver in that room immediately. Work with what you have. We just saw Tom Brady out there at practice. Tom Brady, notoriously known, especially in the back half of his career, for working with older, banged up, or quote-unquote non-household names, to say it politely, at the receiver spot. And he still made it work. And he still threw for 30 touchdowns. And he still had 4,000 yards. And he still led one of the better offenses in the NFL. Now, granted, it took 15 or 18 years to get to that point. But it's possible. And it becomes possible with repetition. That's how it becomes possible. That's how being able to consistently move the ball becomes possible. That's how it becomes easier to connect with a receiver on all three levels. Repetition. And you just cannot, and I understand the joint practices are important. I value joint practices, but you absolutely want to see it in the game, at least for 2 drives. I got another name I want to throw out to you guys, and I've come up with different ideas and scenarios in my head that could play out in Houston's favor if they call teams to ask for a trade. I wanted to say Brian Thomas Jr., as much as I believe, a player like Jordan Addison would be a difference maker, a player like Brian Thomas Jr., who was almost a Texan, but the Houston Texans traded back and they drafted Kamar Lassiter that year. But I just don't see realistically Jacksonville trading within their division, especially to that team, to the Texans. But how would you guys feel about Quentin Johnson, the receiver for the Chargers? Is that a name where maybe bigger receiver has gotten better over the years? He initially came into the league with some hand issues at the the receiver position. But Quentin Johnson, over the last couple of years, we're looking at a player who has been extremely valuable for Justin Herbert. Back-to-back 700 receiving seasons, 16 touchdowns in the last 2 years, 32 first downs in 2024, 27 in 2025. There is value there for a Johnson, especially considering, listen, this is a 13-yard per catch player. This is a 14.5 yard per catch player. He can be a playmaker downfield, which is something that I think we all can agree on. Maybe Houston needs a little bit more of. That's just an idea in itself. But ultimately, overall, not necessarily going to get a lot of starters for preseason. But again, there's the potential of us seeing CJ Stroud out there for a series or 2. Houston absolutely needs to put him, that starting offensive line, out there with Woody Marks, in my opinion, and give him some very great looks with Lewis Bond and Jerry Wayne, because it feels like, as of right now, we'll see a lot more of them this upcoming year, at least until Houston makes a change at the receiver position. Thank you guys for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast, and follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Until next time, ladies and gents and Texan fans across the nation, peace.